Okay, so here we are. The 187 or so defenders of the Alamo have basically trapped themselves in the Alamo at the instigation of William Barry Travis, who made a big mistake. One of the things that we know now is that Travis tried to surrender to Santa Anna, but Santa Anna refused his surrender. Santa Anna was determined to kill everybody at the Alamo. He wanted to do an Arredondo version 2, where he comes up and terrorizes revolutionaries in the Northeast to send a message to the rest of Texas that if they get in his way, he'll steamroll them. He'll kill them. So what happens is that the defenders, after the vanguard of Santa Anna's army shows up on February 23rd, they go into the Alamo. They parley. As I said, William Barry Travis tries to surrender, but Santa Anna refuses. During this period, Travis asks Juan Seguin, who has come into the Alamo to fight with the defenders, he asked Juan Seguin to go to Goliad, of course, which is southeast of San Antonio, where there's about 350 members of the Texas militia, the Texas Army. And Travis asked Seguin to leave the Alamo and to go to Goliad and persuade Fannin, the slave trader, James Fannin, who's the commander at Goliad, to bring his forces to help fight to San Antonio, to Mission Valero, the Alamo, to help fight Santa Anna. So Seguin escapes the Alamo. It's actually not that hard to do. Seguin disguises himself as a civilian. He's a Tejano. It's really hard for the Mexican army to tell that he's a defender of the Alamo, and he does manage to leave the Alamo. Word does get to Fannin, and Fannin's very indecisive. He marches his men towards San Antonio, and then for reasons that we don't know, he marches them back to Goliad. So long story short, the Alamo's not going to get any help. So on March 2nd, 1836, the Texas declares independence. I'm not going to test you on that, but 4 days later, March 6th, the Santa Anna decides he's going to attack the Alamo and he's going to take it. Now, this is where his heavy artillery not being there comes into consideration. Santa Anna, in some ways, did not want to wait for his artillery because he felt like if the artillery came, he could bomb the Alamo into submission, and he wouldn't really get a chance to kill the defenders like he wanted to. So he just wanted to do this dramatic attack on the Alamo and kill all the defenders. So on March 6th, early in the morning, his elements of his army attack the Alamo, and it's an extraordinarily bloody couple of hours. As we know, the defenders are killed. We don't know if Davy Crockett was killed the day of the Alamo. Actually, there's quite a bit of evidence that Davy Crockett was captured and executed in front of Santa Anna the next day with a couple of his men. But it's a very bloody battle. The Texas defenders make Santa Anna pay a very high price for his attack. Santa Anna's casualties were between 400 and 600 men, and some of the best troops that he had, because they're the ones that are fighting the most courageously. And so Santa Anna, although the Alamo is a victory for him, he pays a very high price for it. And the members of the Mexican army, the survivors, are furious at Santa Anna, furious at him for not waiting for the artillery to arrive, where he could have captured the Alamo with much less bloodshed than he did. So they're furious at him, and they're also furious at Santa Anna when he executes Davy Crockett the next day. They're disgusted by the fact that Davy Crockett and the couple of folks that were captured along with Davy Crockett are just murdered on the spot at Santa Anna's order. And so Santa Anna is kind of demoralizing his own army. So in this last bit of this podcast, I want to talk about one of the eyewitness accounts of the Alamo. And this is the eyewitness account by Enrique Esparza. And he gave this account in the 1902. He was interviewed for a San Antonio newspaper. So what would he have been? He would have been in his 80s. His father was Gregorio Esparza, and they had all come into the Alamo during that panic when Santa Anna's army showed up in late February. And he said, this is his description, and it's pretty intense. He says, on the last night, my father was not out, but he and my mother were sleeping together in the headquarters in the Alamo complex. About 2 a.m, there was a great shooting and firing at the northwest corner of the fort. And I heard my mother say, Gregorio, the soldiers have jumped the wall. The fight's begun. His father got up, picked up his arms, and went into the fight. I never saw him again. My uncle, and by the way, his uncle fought with Santa Anna, and Gregorio Esparza, Gregorio, was the only Alamo defender that was given a Christian burial because his uncle went to Santa Anna, and his uncle fought with Santa Anna and went to Santa Anna and requested that, and Santa Anna agreed. So my uncle told me afterwards that Santa Anna had gave him permission to get my father's body, and that he found it in the thick of where the fight had been. He described that night, we could hear the Mexican officers shouting to the men to jump over, and the men were fighting so close that we could hear them strike each other. It was so dark we couldn't see anything, and the families that were in the quarters just huddled up in the corners. Can you imagine their terror? My mother's children were near her. Finally, they began shooting through the dark into the room where we were. A boy who was wrapped in a blanket in one corner was hit and killed. The Mexicans fired into the room at least 15 minutes. It was a miracle, but none of us children were touched. Esparza grew up to become a farmer and a father of 7 children. So that's the Battle of the Alamo, and I think we take the Alamo for granted. You know, if you grew up in Texas, anywhere really, it's world famous. But it really was a horrifying and very, very, very bloody event in which the Texas defenders, the Texan defenders, which included Tejanos, were ultimately killed to the last man. Their bodies, except for the father of Enrique, Gregorio, were all burned at the orders of Santa Anna.